Hello and welcome to the Bombay Film Story. My name is Mayank Shekhar, and this is where we explore Bombay and films through people who've shaped both and been shaped by them. My guest today has been an actor and star for decades, but not just an actor. In fact, over years, he's had so many lives and professions that we really lost count. Copywriter, model, ad filmmaker, stage/theater actor, journalist, once even a Buddhist monk. But we're going to try and stick to his Bombay film story. It's going to be absolutely impossible, but that's the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Kabir Bedi. Thank you so much, Kabir, for joining us.
Hi, Mayank. Lovely to talk to you and lovely to be on your program.
Kabir, there's of course a world in Bombay for you, a fascinating world before Bombay, an equally fascinating world after Bombay. And they're all kind of interconnected in some form. Quick one. Firstly, when did you arrive in the city, Kabir?
I arrived in the city from Delhi in 1960, late 1966.
Okay.
And that's when I began my sojourn in Bombay. I'd come to Bombay actually to become a film director. Mm-hmm. The idea was to direct films. And since there were no film schools at the time, I decided to join advertising. And I joined Lintas with Jason Takuna and Alec Padamsi as my bosses. And then I worked for Ogilvy Mather, in those days known as Benson's, where Frank Simoes was my first boss, and then Ranjan Kapoor was my colleague. And all these people all went on to become legends in advertising. And that's my first reason to come to Bombay. Is I wanted to learn my craft as a director making ad films. And that's what I did for these agencies.
Well, I have to let the listeners know that no matter how amazing this conversation turns out to be, how great an episode of this podcast turns out to be, it will not match Kabir's book. Stories I must tell, because it has fascinating anecdotes and accounts. Very sorry, Kabir, if I make you recount some of them in this conversation. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, personally for me as a journalist, the story that was most fascinating is why you got to Bombay. And the fact that right before that, you were a reporter with the All India Radio. And you actually snagged what would be the greatest interview done by any Indian journalist at the time. You met John, Paul, George, and Ringo at the height of Beatlemania. How did you get to know that the Beatles are in Delhi to begin with?
Well, the Beatles had been in Manila, and they had trouble in Manila with the government. And they made an unscheduled stopover in Delhi on their way back to London. And the minute they arrived, of course, in certain ways, our cities are small cities. They stay in a hotel, people talk, and suddenly everybody knows the Beatles are in town. And I was this cub reporter with All India Radio because it was my way of paying my way through college. And I was the most avid Beatles fans imaginable. So I was determined to get to them. And I persuaded my bosses to give me the All India Radio badge and a tape recorder. And I set off to get them. And I basically, it's a lovely story, but I'll tell you the essence of it. I pressured Brian Epstein, their manager, into giving me the interview by saying that the government of India wanted this interview. Now, technically, I was right. All India Radio was government of India, part of government of India. So the government wanted this interview. And he just got into trouble with the government in the Philippines. And I told him I'm a big Beatles fan and there'll be a lot of trouble if you don't give me this interview. And eventually that's how I got the interview. So there was a lot of drama leading up to that, which I won't get into detail here. A lot of drama during the interview and a lot of drama after the interview. The drama after the interview brought me to Bombay because really it was the way that All India Radio treated that interview. They had no idea what I gave them. They broadcast it without any fanfare and announcement. And worst of all, as I discovered a few weeks later, they had taped my interview to record another program. Now, they had broadcasting gold. They could have played it for ages. But they were hamstrung for cash. And they couldn't afford to buy new tapes all the time, so they kept taping over the old
No, no,
tapes.
but what did they not know who the Beatles were? Like they never like did not understand how huge this is.
No, I'm sure the bosses knew. The bosses knew
Right,
who the Beatles were.
right, right.
But the boys in the back room who have to tape things and give tape recorders to reporters to go and tape something, another interview, another concert, another something, they had no idea. So they just thought this is another program we have to tape over and, life goes on. So that so outraged me that I realized I couldn't work with these people again. And that made me think about what I really wanted to do with my life. And going through all the options, because I was from St. Stephen's. So St. Stephen's was like the breeding ground of IAS officers and IFS officers, IPS officers, people in corporate jobs. And I thought, no, I want to be a filmmaker. And with 700 rupees in my pocket, I set off for Bombay. So that was the beginning of my career. That was the kind of daring of youth that thinks you can conquer the world with nothing in your pocket, just your talent and your vision and your hopes, etc. Surprisingly, I made it happen, but it was a tumultuous journey getting there.
You've had unconventional parenting in that sense. Your father was a philosopher, but communist, very revolutionary ideas. Your mother eventually became the highest rank Buddhist nun. But was also Gandhian, British woman who fought against the British during the Raj. I mean, did they have a certain vision of what you should do in life? Were they okay with you just moving to Bombay with 700 rupees?
Mayank, I was blessed with the most extraordinary parents. I mean, these were extraordinary individuals, even if they were not my parents, because of what they'd sacrificed for India's freedom, the circumstances in which they lived, insecurities they faced. They had no money. And they were idealists. And coming from Oxford, where they both were on scholarship, they could have got the best jobs in India. So these were people that lived for their ideals. And they gave me so much in terms of values and inner strength and ability to face adversity, all those things. And they never, ever interfered in my career choices. They never said, become this, do this. They said, you'll find your way. They sacrificed a lot to give me a good education. So I was sent to Delhi Public School, Sherwood in Nainital, St. Stephen's in Delhi, even a year in Shantiniketan to water my Indian roots. But when I told my father, I'm heading for Bombay, he never asked me, how are you going to do it? He didn't have money, but his attitude was, follow your heart. They gave me the courage to be different. They gave me the courage to say, you don't have to take the trodden path. You can take the road less traveled. And for that, I am eternally grateful to them. They were remarkable people. There's a whole chapter in my book on their lives. Not just their achievements, but also this incredible relationship between the two, where even after my mother became a Buddhist nun and my father became a New Age philosopher in Italy, divided by continents, how this couple remained in their strange spiritual way, soulmates to the end of their lives.
Speaking of schools, Kabir, and that's not a school you mentioned among all that you did. One of them is Auntie Goba's, if I'm not mistaken.
No, the first school I went to was Tyndall Bisco in Srinagar.
Okay.
That was where my father went after independence because he was a good friend of Sheikh Abdullah. In fact, he wrote the Constitution of Kashmir, and he did many great things. But then he had a difference of opinion with Sheikh Saab when Sheikh Abdullah decided to toy with the idea of independence. He said, I can't be part of anything that separates India again, and left and came down to Delhi. In Delhi, the second school I went to was Mrs. Goba's school, which was a very wonderful Montessori school run by this mercurial but very kind and creative German lady. And that's where I became friends with Rajiv and Sanjay Gandhi.
That's what I wanted to get at, yes. Tell me about that friendship. It's a fascinating story of hanging around with people who eventually became, well, at least one person who eventually became the most powerful man legally, and another person who became perhaps the most powerful man, well, not on paper, but in reality. These two, Sanjay Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, were your buddies growing up.
They were, and we were just a bunch of kids fooling around. I mean, there was no way I could have imagined that Sanjay and Rajiv and Auntie Indira Gandhi,
Right.
who was just the official hostess of her father, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, two of them would become prime ministers, and one would become unofficially the most powerful man in India. In those days, we were just playing in these large rooms, they had this wonderful set of trains that ran on tracks, and it covered the whole room. It was like a train system with signals that went up and down and things they could control remotely. It was very advanced for the time. And we enjoyed playing on that. We made cars with sets of Meccano, and we rode horses, and we attended each other's birthday parties, and we were just friends. And I was more friends with Rajiv than Sanjay, because Sanjay was more introverted. But Rajiv was always this easy, laid-back, garrulous kind of chap. Cut to, when he becomes prime minister, I go and see him, and he ushers me in past a room full of waiting ministers, and he leads me into the office. He closes the door behind me. He expands his arms, holds out his arms to show the expanse of the prime minister's office, and he says, "Kahan phas gaye yaar?" And I say, "Rajiv, you're the Prime Minister of India, man. Get serious." He said, "Don't you give me that. Everybody's asked me all day to get serious. Yeah, my buddy, sit down, let's talk about old times." And we talked about old times and future ideas. That was the kind of relationship. I didn't see that much of them in my college years because I was busy studying and working at All India Radio, trying to pay my way through college. But I did visit Sanjay in his what he called his factory, which was really a glorified garage, where he drove me around on this little car with that sort of functioned. It was a glorified golf cart. But he knew it was not the car he wanted. He was trying, he was experimenting. And because of Sanjay not succeeding in his experiments, he tied up with Maruti Suzuki, which eventually led by default to allowing other foreign car makers in India. And we moved beyond the four dull cars we had on the Indian roads: the Ambassador, the Standard Herald, the Fiat, and one other. So we owe Sanjay Gandhi a lot for bringing cars and modern cars to India, despite all that was alleged against him, his deeds or misdeeds. But he did provide a pivotal role in terms of giving India its cars. And I must say, for all their alleged deeds and misdeeds, when they both passed away, I really mourned the loss of childhood friends, because we had been friends. Both died in very tragic circumstances. Rajiv assassinated by a Tamilian, Sri Lankan Tamilian, and Sanjay in a stunt plane, because he was always a daredevil. He just took it a step too far, as he did with many things in his life.
Absolutely. I think yours would be the only other Bombay film connection that I can think of with Rajiv Gandhi. The other, of course, being Amitabh Bachchan. Amitabh and Rajiv were great friends too. And in fact, Ajitabh also shows up quite often when you read up about them and their childhood. Ajitabh used to be friends with Sanjay Gandhi, if I'm not mistaken. Did you know Amitabh around that time, Amitabh Bachchan, because of a common connection in terms of schooling?
Yes, I used to see Amit, and I used to see Bunty much more, because Amit actually was in the school that Sherwood, as was Bunty. Amitabh left Sherwood before I joined. He was senior to me. Bunty was my class fellow, so I got to know Bunty
being Ajitabh
Bachchan. I got to know him very well, and we remained friends. And together we were, together with Bunty a lot of times at the Prime Minister's house, playing with Rajiv and Sanjay. He was one of the playmates. The other was a chap called Adil, who was the son of Yunus, who was a confidant of the Gandhi family. But there was another very interesting connection between Amitabh and me. My mother used to, during the freedom struggle, my parents lived in pre-partition Lahore. Lahore was the capital of undivided Punjab. And they had lived in these huts where I was actually born, where all these leftists would gather. But to make money, my mother was professor of English at the Fateh Chand College in Lahore. One of her colleagues was Teji Suri, and they became very good friends. And Teji Suri, in fact, was being wooed very ardently by an army major, but she chose this kurta pajama wearing poet called Harvansh Rai Bachchan, who then went on to become one of the giants of Hindi literature. And Teji would actually take my elder brother
Mhm.
to my mother when my mother was imprisoned by the British. So there was a close friendship there between them. And Teji became the mother of Amitabh Bachchan. And I knew Auntie Teji very well, but really speaking, after I came to Bombay, I just lost contact with them.
I find it fascinating how so many people who become so successful in completely varied fields sometimes tend to have a common connection. They've met somewhere. Like I think even in your case, we've of course spoken about the Delhi part of it, but when you come to Bombay and there's a Juhu gang you speak of, and this amazing world of Bollywood and Bombay films that's I want you to go like in depth into that world for sure. But before we get there, when you come to Bombay, because you've chosen advertising as a profession, I'm assuming, Kabir, that you would have been in the southern side of the city because that's really where
Yeah,
the advertising
that's right.
situation was.
When I worked in advertising, I first had a paying guest accommodation in a building called White House,
Hmm.
which is on Walkeshwar Road,
That's a great
Marine
address.
Drive, going up to the top of Malabar Hill. That's where the censor board had its offices too. But there was a beautiful,
Still does,
yeah,
actually,
and
still
there
does.
was a beautiful flat right on the sea at the bottom of it. And I had a lovely high ceilinged paying guest accommodation there. And then I moved up to the top of Malabar Hill, apartment called Bayview. That's where Pratibha and I had our first home. But then I decided, after Pooja was born, that I didn't want my child to grow up in the cemented sidewalks of South Bombay. I wanted open spaces of Juhu. So we moved to Juhu, and that became sort of the hub of what was then called the Juhu Gang. Actually, there were many Juhu gangs, but our gang was sort of Shekhar Kapoor, Shabana Azmi, Parveen Babi, Jani Denzongpa, Parikshit Sani, Neelam Johar, daughter of I.S. Johar, Ketan Anand, and Vivek Anand, Jalal Aga, a number of sort of Satyadev Dubey became an honorary member of the gang. But then there was this other Juhu where you had the Khan brothers, Feroz Khan, Sanjay Khan, Samir, and Akbar. And they were a dashing bunch, real fun to hang out with. But they weren't the kind of laid-back chillers that we were. We were sort of more part of the feeling of the 1960s, of the whole, counterculture movement. We were the original bohemians of Bollywood. And that's what we chose to do: break tradition, push the envelope, admire the anti-war protests in the West, admire the counterculture movement, listen to our gods, the Beatles, the Doors, Simon and Garfunkel, the Pink Floyd. These were the seminal bands of the 60s that came up and which we loved and adored and heard their music. The Doors, so many wonderful sounds and so many wonderful evenings, all in this ambience of Juhu, which very much felt like Goa at the time. And I remember Satyadev once being on the beach with Satyadev Dubey and a bunch of friends, and we saw that it was night, and there was this, must have been a plane that was passing, but it was passing very low, and we couldn't hear it. We could just see this light. And somebody said, "That's an alien spaceship." And Dubey ran towards them saying, "Take me with you, take me with you." And Dubey went on to win, the National Theatre Awards and the Sahitya Akademi Awards, and was a seminal force in Hindi theatre, and a wonderful man. He is the biggest influence in the creation of Amrish Puri as an actor, because Amrish did his most amazing theatre work with Satyadev Dubey. And working with Dubey, he certainly hammered out the best, created the best actors because of the discipline that he had and the kind of plays he chose. So he was an influence far bigger than his name at the time. He grew to something quite amazing. I forgot to mention Mahesh Bhatt was also very much part of this gang this bohemian gang that we were part of. In fact, Mahesh cast me in his first film as a director,
Right.
Manzile Aur Bhi Hain.
And that is a film which did not release because it was considered too scandalous, perhaps, in
Well,
terms of the theme.
it was a very revolutionary theme because it was a story of two convicts, played by me and an actor called Gulshan, uh, who, for various reasons, are trying to get across a mythical border to escape. And with them comes this prostitute. And in the course of the story, one man sleeps with her, then her allegiances change, she sleeps with the other man, and then she gets pregnant, and we don't know whose child it is.
Mm,
And this was the theme of this film.
mm,
So the censor board absolutely said, no, can't do it. Then, since I'd come from South Bombay, I knew the whole art and culture set and all the journalists. I organized a screening for them. I said, this is the atrocity being inflicted on freedom of speech. But, the culture crowd said this is a commercial Bollywood film. It wasn't arty enough for their taste, and they refused to support it. The only man that agreed to support it and said, come with me, I'll march with you to the censor office, was playwright Vijay Tendulkar. He was the only man for whom it was a matter of principle that a film with a theme like this was being banned because the censors didn't agree with it on a moral basis. Eventually, they mangled it with 1,000 cuts, released it, and the picture flopped. So that was a rather unfortunate beginning
So it
for.
did release, though.
But it released so badly cut that the film made no sense anymore. And whatever logic there was to that very bold story was simply scissored out of the film. And Mahesh also used to be an assistant of Raj Khosla. And Raj Khosla gave me my first big hit with Kache Dhage. He cast me with Vinod Khanna, and we were mortal enemies on screen, and who become friends and then sacrificed themselves together. Off screen, we became lifelong friends because of Kache Dhage. And Raj Khosla was a director who had given Devanand 5 of his biggest blockbusters and was one of the most highly regarded directors. But because of that, I became lifelong friends with Vinod. And Vinod became an even better friend when, in the course of his career, he just renounced Bollywood and he went to Oregon to stay with Guru Osho. And I was in Hollywood those days. So he would come down to Hollywood and meet me and chat with me, have lots of dinners with me, and give me all the gossip that was going on in the ashram in Oregon. And the gossip actually is the topic of a whole documentary series on Netflix called Wild Wild Country, something like that.
Yeah.
And all that happened because of Osho's manager and the problems it created for him and the community, etc. But it was ironic because here, Mahesh Bhatt also had become a disciple of Osho. But he renounced Osho, whereas Vinod renounced Bollywood for Osho and went to Oregon, and in fact became one of his biggest defenders when he finally came back to India. And we had that bond. We always had a very kind of spiritual bond. In fact, I was supposed to see Vinod 3 days before he passed away. And then something came up and there was a problem, I couldn't go. And the next thing I knew, I was attending his funeral. So he was a great guy. And ironically, Vinod also was my MP because he stood as MP for Gurdaspur in Punjab. And my ancestral village is Dera Baba Nanak, which falls in Gurdaspur, which is just an hour and a half drive from Amritsar. So there were lots of links between Vinod and me throughout our lives. And our paths crossed on many continents. And when he came back from the ashram in Oregon, he was broke. He took a small room in the Automobile Club on Malabar Hill, one room, and from there he rebuilt his whole film career.
Wow, I did not know that.
To the extent that he then bought a beautiful flat for himself in Il Palazzo, etc., which is where he stayed. But his was a real comeback story too.
I must also let the listeners know, and I'm pretty sure they do by now, but you are actually a direct descendant of Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism. Were you spiritually inclined, and especially given the company you kept while in Bombay? I know that there's a whole lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but there is also a lot of spirituality that happened in the 60s in that whole flower power generation. Isn't it true?
No, absolutely. It was a kind of social reawakening. It was a religious reawakening in many ways, because suddenly Eastern religions became important in the West. Even Indian music.
Right.
Ravi Shankar became the guru of George Harrison, and the influence of the Indian music was felt in the Beatles. In fact, George Harrison then brought the Beatles back to India for a very productive period in their life to the ashram of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in Rishikesh. And they had some of the most creative moments, because when you are at the height of your power in terms of as a performer, as a creative artist, etc., the demands on your time are so immense that it's very hard to find the time for creativity. And they had exhausted themselves with the material they'd created, etc., and the constant demands for new material. Their manager, Brian Epstein, had died 6 months before that. So when they came to Rishikesh, it was like, oh God, we can breathe again. And in that breathe again phase, they started jamming again like they were, like the band got together originally. It was a creative resurgence for them. And that influence of the Beatles was there. So the importance of yoga and meditation, etc., suddenly became important because the hippies embraced it, the flower power generation embraced it. I always had Sikhism as part of my roots, Buddhism as part of my roots, Sikhism from my father, Buddhism from my mother. But I was also had this great spiritual curiosity as to what is the truth, what really is the truth of our existence. Is there one God? Are there many? Is there one soul? Are there rebirths? Is there destiny? Is there free will? Where did we all come from? How did it all begin? So my spiritual quest also went on through this period. I used to listen to Jiddu Krishnamurti at the Constitution Club in Delhi. I used to hear him at the JJ School of Art when he came to Mumbai, even at the home of my friend Asit Chanmal, where I had a much smaller session with him. And I even met him in California, where I had a wonderful meeting with him, which I've described in my book. And he was a man that attacked all religious orthodoxy, all systems, saying they're only corrupting your mind. You will not find truth through any system, any path, any religion. So he was like a purgative, clearing your mind of all your existing beliefs. Then there was Osho. Then there was many other gurus along the way that I met, the books I read. For me, that spiritual part of me has always been there. And that spiritual inquiry continued even as a child. In the 50s, I became a monk in Burma. So that has always been part of me and has always continued.
There's a very strong spiritual side to you, a very strong intellectual side to you. And I'm looking at you as a young man in Bombay. You made a name for yourself in theater. You've done advertising, of course. You moved to the Jew side, which is really the Bollywood side. That's a completely different world, isn't it, Kabir, in terms of the thinking, what they believe to be expression? Were you like shocked, or was there a complete, two sides to you? One that you saw before you, which was the world of Bollywood in the 70s, and the one that was inside you, which was a more questioning mind in that sense.
Well, the spiritual side went on. I never seriously thought of joining a monastic order or anything. I was just searching for what is true in our existence. But it was a huge risk for me to join Bollywood. I could have had a perfectly good career in advertising, because not only was I making ad films, not only was I working with the best agencies, I was also, at that time, India's best-known male model. Shobha Day, then Rajya was the female supermodel, along with a few others. And I used her in some of my ad films. Joining Bollywood was a huge risk for me. That was a leap of faith. Which said, okay, you said you want to be a director. In advertising, you reached your limit. If you go up, you will stop making films. If you want to keep making films, Bollywood mein ghus jao, dekho kya hota hai, kuch na kuch nikal aayega. And then I joined Bollywood and acting began, and the acting never stopped, because then the Italians came and all kinds of things happened there. So that was a real leap of faith, because you're leaving guaranteed security for the insecurity of the film industry. And believe me, it's the most insecure industry in the world.
Give me some examples of these insecurities. In terms of what you saw.
Everybody in this industry is insecure. The ones who are even the most successful are afraid of losing their success. 3, 4 flop films, and suddenly you're yesterday's man. The people that don't have that success are insecure because they're not getting the roles that will make them that person. Your pay is irregular. Your bills are regular. You're always dependent on somebody wanting you for a film, unless you're a filmmaker, in which case you have to find somebody who will finance your film. It's a very insecure industry because it's dealing in the business of emotion. It's dealing with selling intangibles, and there's no guarantee of success. I have seen so many stars come and go on 3 continents. I've seen so many filmmakers come and go on 3 continents in the course of my career. Anyone who survives 50 years in this business deserves an Oscar for survival. That's why I say it's the most insecure business in the world.
In that case, you've got your Oscar already.
I've got my Oscar this year, yeah.
But what I also meant was that in terms of a cultural shock, let's say you're meeting a producer at the time. I mean, you would probably hear some really bizarre stories in terms of scripts being offered to you, or just take us through some of the corny people. I mean, we'll call them corny only because we don't know them personally, but like some oddballs that you would meet in the 70s Bollywood. Do you remember some of these stories, Kabir?
The very first film that I was offered was a film called Halchal. And this was by a producer called O.P. Ralhan. O.P. Ralhan had just made a film called Phool Aur Patthar that made Dharmendra a big star. And he called me to the office and said, I want to sign you for my film. I said, yes, sir. I'm delighted, honored. What's the story about? You are asking me for a story? Me? Hey, just give me an idea, sir. Do you know who you're asking? I made Dharmendra a hero, and you are asking me, you, a rank newcomer, asking me for a story? Don't be stupid. You want to do my film? Yes, I want to do your film. So I signed the film. I thought I was the leading man. I thought I was the hero.
Right.
Turned out I wasn't. Ralhan was the hero. And his heroine was the legendary Helen, who was famous for her dance. Zeenat Aman was in the same film. She was also brought in, probably with the same power of sign my film. Film didn't work, but neither I nor Zeenat got all the blame for it because we weren't the hero and heroine.
That's the hero.
But I must say, Ralhan was a wonderful man. He was a man with a big heart. He was very particular about that I say the Hindi dialogues exactly as he wrote them, and they weren't easy. So he was very patient with me there. More importantly, when I got into a jam, I got into a traffic accident in Bandra, and the police tried to pin the blame on me. I called Ralhan in panic, and he came and fought with the police for an hour before they let me off. I was very sad to hear that he fell on hard times towards the end of his days, and I'll always be grateful to him for producing my first released film.
Were there other oddballs that you remember?
Things have changed greatly here. Today in Bollywood, you're actually seeing scripts. People are presented something and they...
Right.
Those days, all you got was a narration. And you better remember that narration perfectly because you'll never, ever get that narration again. And the film will be shot over 2 years, not in order, and everybody was given narrations and then given scenes just before you go onto the set. Now, there's a reason for that. Because films took so long to make, they were afraid that a script would fall into the wrong hands and somebody else would use the twist in the climax for their film. So to prevent that happening, no scripts were around. Secondly, when you narrate to an actor, you narrate to him in a way whereby he feels, hey, this is my film. And you narrate it to 3 actors, you get 3 actors, each one thinks it's my film. And then you come onto the sets and the problems begin. You know, narration
then you realize the producer is the hero.
That's what happened to me. The way a lot of films were made for many, many years. Like I said, today things are more modern. People give you a very clear script, if not a script, a very detailed synopsis, and you get a good idea of what you're getting into. And it's good. Bollywood has moved in leaps and bounds from those days, not just technologically, not just in terms of their budgets, but also in terms of the kind of films they're making and the way they make them. But also, you know, scripts can change. For instance, there was a film called Qurban. The producer came to me and said, you and Sunil Dutt, two giants, clash between you two. और एक लड़का लड़की है वो गाना गाना गाएंगे etc. And I was thrilled because I had adored Sunil Dutt since Mother India. I was in awe of the man. To paired opposite him was like, wow. A film called Qurban. Before the shooting, they said, कोई लड़का लड़की है आपके दिमाग में? I said, सलीम साहब का लड़का सलमान कुछ फिल्मों में आ गया, उसे ले लीजिए ना. हाँ, अच्छा आइडिया, उसे लेते हैं. So they went to sign up Salman, and they signed a wonderful girl called Ayusha Churka. And the filming started in installments, as it used to be in those days. During the shooting of this film, 4 other films of Salman became super hits, right? Immediately, scenes were added for the lovers, many songs were added for the lovers. It became a film about the two lovers. Sunil Dutt and I became background music. so much for Clash of Giants.
Well, you did 70 films though, in Bombay.
Yeah.
Were you at any point frustrated by the whole system, by the way it worked, by narration and the change of story when you land up on set and other things around it?
Fact is, firstly, I wasn't here for almost 25 years of my life. So how could Bollywood cast me? Secondly, I will never diss Bollywood because Bollywood launched me. They made me an all India name. I was one of the actors that was known when the Italians came into town, and I was known because of Bollywood. So they gave me my start in life. They were the people that led to my getting the opportunity with the Italians, which made me a superstar in Europe. Plus, they've always given me immense respect. Also, Mayank, in the middle of my Hollywood years, Rakesh Roshan calls me and says, I've got a film for you where I want you to be the hero. And I said, why me? What happened to all the other Bollywood heroes? And he said, no, Kabir, the thing is, in my film, the hero becomes the villain and no hero will play it. And if I put a villain in the role, there'll be no surprise. You're the only one who can be a hero and a villain convincingly. And so I came back. Of course, I also came back and running because I heard he'd cast Rekha in the role. And Rekha at that time had become a really iconic actress, even then. She was a National Award winner. She got her second Filmfare Award for Khoon Bhari Maang. And she was a highly accomplished actress. In fact, I knew Rekha when she first came to Bombay because we all lived in the same beach house society. And she was one floor beneath me on the left. Jaya Bachchan was 2 floors beneath me on the right. So you can work out the significance of that. But Rekha, in spite of her success with Sawan Bhadon, was disregarded by the industry. She's fat, she's plump, she's dark, South Indian. They didn't take her seriously. But film by film, Rekha converted herself from the ugly duckling into the white swan. And by the time Rakesh Roshan cast her in Khoon Bhari Maang, she was one of Bollywood's biggest stars. So that's what lured me back to India to shoot in the Bollywood film in the middle of my Hollywood years. And it became my biggest Bollywood hit. So there's much I have to thank Bollywood for.
Of course, there is Sandakan that made you the huge star in Europe, and how this is an Italian legend that kids in Italy over generations have read. But there is an Indian man sitting in Juhu Beach House who gets to play this part. One, why would they not cast an Italian person for a character that is so iconic to begin with? Why would they reach you? Or how did you reach there? Just take us through this, Kabir.
Sandakan was an iconic character. It was written by a writer called Emilio Salgari in the last century. A man who wrote the most amazing adventure stories set in Asia, South America, Russia, the North Pole. He was read by every Italian child. He was all the South American writers, Borges and Pablo Neruda and Isabel Allende, all had read Salgari. Even Che Guevara said he read 62 books of Emilio Salgari. So he was an iconic writer. They had made 2 films on Sandokan before I played the role, which didn't make any great waves. But Sandokan was an Asian pirate who fought the British, so they needed an Asian actor for it. And Sergio Solima, who was the director, had this vision of it, of doing it as a television series rather than as a film. And that was a masterstroke, because in that he could tell the whole Sandokan stories, and he could tell it. And he was a great screenplay writer, because he'd done films with Charles Bronson, various other big Western stars, plus Italian stars. He fought for it. He wrote the screenplay. He got an Oscar-winning art director. He got brand new musicians who provided almost pop score to a classical film. And they were looking for an Asian actor. So they came to Bombay as the first city, as part of a 6-nation tour they were on, to find the best actor in Asia to play Sandokan. And the first actor they met in the first city they came to was me. And there were 2 reasons that helped. One was I had a beard. Because after Kache Dhage, where I grew my beard, the producer said to me, "Sir, don't shave your beard. Aapke liye bahut hi lucky hai. Daadi aap rakhiye." So I kept my beard. That enabled me, that made me look very much like the drawings that Salgari had made of his classical novels. So I looked like Sandokan. But that didn't get me the role. What got me the role was the auditions I did. They asked me to come to Rome at my own cost to do the audition. And first I'd bristle off and do an audition at my cost. You've got to have some respect for Indian actors. But then I thought, no, this is something which could be a great opportunity for me. Because what I did not want to do in Bollywood was be a singing, dancing star. I admire singing and dancing. I love it. I watch it. I can't do it. And then I realized that all the leading men have to sing and dance. So I realized I had to travel abroad if I wanted a career as an actor. And that led to my saying, yes, I'll come to Rome at my cost and I'll do the audition. And then I put everything I had into that audition. Riding, swimming, dramatic scenes, action scenes, everything they tested me on. And I got through. I don't know who else they tested from Asia, but I got the role. And it led to great stardom.
You kind of have an idea that it's going to be a big production, clearly, because you're willing to spend your own money to go and audition for this part in Rome. The sense I get is, if there was an equivalent of a show like that in India, the level of response it got in Italy, what Sandokan got in Italy, would be, say, a Mahabharata or a Ramayana, which was like literally like a traffic stopper kind of show where people are just not on the streets, they're sitting and watching. Now, you are technically, in that sense, and maybe even more than that, you're like the Arun Govil at that moment, because you're literally God for the masses in Italy. Did you see that coming?
No, we knew this thing was likely to be a success because it was not just Italian. It was produced by the Italians, the Germans, and the French. So it was a European co-production.
Right.
And we all felt very good about it. We knew it would be successful. Nobody could predict the kind of success that it had. It was Beatlemania in Europe, and I was the receiving end of it. That kind of success is what actors dream about, and I was getting it. And I thought, my God. But you're right in one very important sense. My success was so enormous that people saw me only as Sandokan.
Right.
And
like with Arun Govil.
Well, in a sense, yeah.
Right.
Because I talked to a director, I said, after all the press I'm getting, after all, being on every magazine cover, being on every radio station, after the streets being empty when our show is on, why am I not being inundated with offers? And they said, Kabir, you're Sandokan. We make social and political films, comedies. We can't have Sandokan walking into it. It'll spoil the film. That's when I wondered, I said, am I going to be a one-hit wonder in the country of my greatest success? So I realized I had to move beyond. That was one of the reasons I pushed on to Hollywood. And then working in Hollywood, doing the Bond film, doing other things there, Bold and Beautiful, and other films, Ashanti with Michael Caine, and all these films came to Italy. And in the end, I did so many Italian films that I ended up being knighted by the Italian Republic for my services and my lifetime.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all. I should also let listeners know that there was a point where the name registration office in Italy had a problem because every parent wanted to name the child Kabir, and there is no K sound in Italian,
K,
which is
alphabet K doesn't exist. Yeah, but
alphabet K does.
yeah, but not. I mean, not every parent. But there are people that came to me complaining, saying, "We want to call our son Kabir, but there's no K." You know, but I do know some boys in Italy who are called Kabir. In fact, the son of a good friend of mine is called Kabir. I don't know how he got registered, but the majority couldn't because K doesn't exist. They use the CH instead of the K.
Fascinating. I'm going to take you back again to Bombay. And of course, there are your Hollywood years, which obviously are very different from the way it would be for an actor to go and try and work in the US. Because right now, one gets a sense that there is a huge population of the children of migrants who moved in the 60s and 70s. And because that population exists, there can be roles written for that population, keeping them in mind, which is clearly not the case when you moved to pursue acting in Hollywood. Would that be correct to say, Kavir?
That is very correct because when I went there, the biggest obstacle I faced is they weren't writing roles for Indians. And it was very difficult to find employment. So I had to diversify. I had to say, okay, I'm not just there to play Indian roles. Fortunately, I look like a person who could be many nationalities. And I just became sort of foreigner in Hollywood films. So in Ashanti, I played a Tuareg tribesman. In The Bold and the Beautiful, which I did for almost a year, I played Moroccan Prince Omar. It was only in the James Bond film Octopussy where I was actually cast for what I am, an Indian and a Punjabi. And it was a real high doing a Bond film, being the first Indian actor to shoot a Bond film and be shooting it in India. That was a real thrill for me. Today, it is easier for Indian actors to find roles abroad, but it is never easy. This is not an easy business.
Okay.
Therefore, I doubly salute the kind of success that Priyanka Chopra has had because she did it on with her skill, with her strategy, with everything that it took. But it's never easy, even though more roles are being written. But by the same token, there are more candidates for it.
When you have a lot of friends, these are people you made staying in Bombay, and of course the Italian stardom happens, but thereafter you move to Hollywood, which can be a lonely place perhaps for someone who's starting from scratch, because that's really roughly what you were trying to do. Did you feel homesick? Did you feel like coming back to Bombay? There's a Jew gang here. There's a life that you left behind.
When I left India, I always knew I'd come back to India. Because India is part of my DNA. It's part of what I grew up with. It's what I want to be part of. It's this country I care about the most. Its problems the most. It's where I feel home. And I knew I was going abroad, but I always planned to come back. And also, if I really felt homesick, I'd just catch a plane and come. And my children were growing up here before they came and joined me in America for high school, and later my son for his college at Carnegie Mellon. So India was always home. That sense of home never left me. But living abroad for all those years can be a very lonely road for actors because no matter what, you are the minority. You are the minority, you're the stranger in a strange land. And you have to find work as best as you can. I did it by diversifying my nationality. Other actors have done it by making films in their own countries that made waves in America and then going to Hollywood. All the big stars, foreign stars in Hollywood at the time, had become stars by doing something in their own countries before they came. So there was Sonia Braga of Brazil. There was Antonio Banderas and Penelope Cruz from Spain, who'd done all the Almodovar films. There was Rutger Hauer, who'd done brilliant work in Holland. There was Ben Kingsley, who'd done Gandhi, which is a British film. So I was trying to make my way up the ranks, which is a much harder road to hoe. And I must say I did a lot of work in Hollywood, but it never made me a star in Hollywood. I was a working actor. I was known, but I wasn't a star in Hollywood. Stardom happened for me the biggest in Europe. And of course, people in India know me. How big or small a star I am, that's for them to decide. But they all know me, they love me, they respect me, and India's home.
Those formative years when you were in Bombay, and because I want to come back to Bombay, we keep going abroad, we keep coming back to your city, to my city, and to Juhu. In fact, that's where you are. The sense I get is also of the Bohemian times was that there were, like, say, let's say there were two camps, if I can put it that way. There was the part that was hardcore Bollywood, and there was the part that was looking. That's the sense I get from this conversation. And there's slightly more countercultural, slightly, looking to push the envelope, as you put it. This is also the camp that was trying to do experiment with new things, even in their own lives. Kabir, for instance, the fact that you were in a live-in relationship in Bombay. Was that a very big deal back in the day? And of course, later on, you got married to Pratima Bedi. Was that a very big deal, or was this just not so much for the
No,
for the world around you?
it was a big deal in the 1960s for an unmarried couple to be living together publicly. Was scandalous. Newspaper articles were printed, not news, magazine articles were printed on us. They lived together without being married. This was news. And today people wouldn't care. I mean, lots of people live together. That was pushing the envelope in those times. And I have explored this very carefully in my book and talked about what it took to lead a very unconventional life with Pratima and all the drama and excitement that implied. I've given you sort of broad brush strokes of my life, but the journey that I've shared in my book is an emotional one. It's called The Emotional Life of an Actor. So my book is an immersive experience. It's entertaining, it's informative, it takes you there. My life story it lies in the actual nuts and bolts of what happened to me and the dramas all that involved and the tumultuous roller coaster that my life has been in terms of my successes, tragedies, triumphs, failures, strengths and weaknesses.
But even events, Kabir, if you look at what would be quote unquote controversial events, and not necessarily in this particular case from your own life, but of lives that are connected to yours. Like, for instance, an iconic image from the time would be Pratima Bedi streaking. Was that a big moment? I mean, we read about it now, but was it like an earth-shattering moment even for you? And how was it received? The fact that she shot perhaps for a magazine at the time, was that something? Did you actually visit an editor's office to blast them because they published that picture? Did that happen?
No, that didn't happen. No, it certainly came as a shock to me, and then how I reacted to that, etc., is in my book, but. Vinod Mehta said I threatened him.
Exactly,
and
that's what I read in his book.
I confronted Vinod. I said, Vinod, what is this? This never happened. He said, maybe I was mistaken on that. Maybe I got it wrong. Because he couldn't say to me that I had done that when I hadn't. I would remember it. He would remember it. But I guess, it's the factoid he invented, I guess, for whatever reasons.
Well, because that's my memory of Lucknow Boy, which is the memoir that Vinod Mehta wrote, and when he wrote extensively about how you'd confronted him in his office because he decided to publish those images. You're telling me that actually never happened. You should have asked him to issue an apology, I guess.
I did. Okay. I did. And he said, well, maybe I got it wrong. He just fluffed it up. Maybe he just brushed it aside. And I knew that there's nothing he could say. But I don't want to diss Vinod Mehta because he's a great journalist. He had some staggering achievements. He blazed new trails. So let's not, diss a man for a small oversight or exaggeration. But that was certainly huge. People said, how can you live with a woman who runs publicly naked? All these things I had to face. I don't want to get into the details of because there were many, many painfully difficult issues I had to confront and decide in my relationship with Pratima. There were moral dilemmas. There were life choices. There were things that could have ended our relationship at any point. So how a normal marriage eventually evolves or becomes an open marriage, all that is in my book. What it takes, how do you feel in that? What results from it? I don't want to get into the details here, but
Right.
these are the issues that my book talks about.
I mean, I'm curious to know, and I don't know how many people have actually attempted that as an experiment. Most people are either together or they're not. But when you're in that gray zone where it's love and possession has nothing to do with it, does that screw your head, or that's something that one can eventually get used to, Kabir?
I'm not going to discuss that, Shekhar.
Okay.
I'm not going to give away the crown jewels of my book in a soundbite.
Okay, I'm going to get to another event, and this also has more to do with the person you were with, and became a hugely controversial event with your wife Nikki Bedi, and then there's a show that happened, and I distinctly remember watching it as a child, and what an uproar that caused with the I think what was the first episode of the show, Nikki Tonight, if I'm not mistaken, and something was said about Mahatma Gandhi, and that's it. The whole country was up in flames. Do you recall that as something that really shook you equally in that sense?
Well, it shook Nikki and me. I was
Right.
shooting in Los Angeles for The Bold and Beautiful. Nikki had to stay back because she got this wonderful break to do this show called Nikki Tonight, which is going to be Star TV's main show. And
Right.
she was brilliant. And one night in a particular program, a show crowd, Kabir was there, India's leading gay rights activist. And Nikki asked him, she said, why is it that you have not risen to becoming one of the biggest editors in town like all your contemporaries? And she was going to basically leading up to the fact that maybe he was discriminated against because he was gay. He answered the question by saying, 20 years ago, I wrote a story in the Illustrated Weekly of India where I called Gandhi a terrible name, and Khushwant Singh published it. And I got into a lot of trouble. What he called Gandhi in that article was then repeated on television and became the headlines.
Right.
Gandhi abused on Nikki Tonight's show, demonstrations on the streets, questions in parliament, threats to her life. Star TV just yanked the show, and Nikki had to fly out to Los Angeles and rebuild her career from there. So I'm not going to repeat what Ashok Rao Kavi said for fear that your show will get yanked off the air.
Right.
but you can read it in my book.
Again, to do with you, but actually to do with your partner, Kabir. And this has to do, of course, with Parveen Babi. And you guys were together for many years. This would be when you were the Italian superstars, when you were in a relationship with Parveen Babi. You could sense that maybe she wasn't in the greatest of mental health, or certainly not the fittest mentally. You saw glimpses of that, and do you think that it became worse over the years? Do you think that's what happened? Given that you've been with her for so long, Kabir.
Parveen was a very sensitive, very beautiful, very intelligent, very perceptive girl. Great fun to be with in many, many ways. But there was this shadow that was cast on the relationship by episodes, increasing episodes, that would take over. And most of this happened at the height of my European success. So I had to deal on one hand with the euphoria of success, and the other hand deal with the extreme problems I was having in the relationship because of episodes like that. And I knew that she had to be treated. I think my insistence on her being treated was one of the things that caused her to leave me in the end, because she had an absolutely paranoia about doctors, because she felt that if the industry came to know, they would drop her like a hot potato. It was survival for her. She couldn't let people know that she had these problems, and she wanted to keep it secret. And she felt with a paranoia that doctors would also talk about it, particularly in India. It's a very complex subject, and I've written about it with as much sensitivity as I could. But because I've been equally harsh myself, I'm able to call out what other people did as well, and share that honestly, because my story is not, it's my truth, it's my story, it's what happened in my life. But it relates certainly to the life of Parveen Babi. It was a very important relationship in my life. And all that happened, all the turbulence that happened, all the dramas that happened in the course of that relationship. Let me give you one story from there, and there are many. When I went to Italy for the time of Sandokan, Parveen was a bigger star than me in India. And suddenly I became this huge star in Europe. And we were invited to dinner by Gina Lollobrigida. And Parveen and I were both invited. And Parveen had already been felt a little slighted because she wasn't the same center of attention that she was in India. And when we met Gina in her home, Gina sort of talked to me and introduced me to her friends, etc., and sort of ignored Parveen a bit. Then Gina took us to a private dinner at a restaurant where the manager of Air India, Cecil de Mello, was there, and Gina was there, I was there, Parveen was there. And Gina arrives at the restaurant, said, let's dance. So I danced with her. I'm thinking, my God, I'm dancing with Gina Lollobrigida. There were only two big international divas from Italy, Gina Lollobrigida and Sophie Loren. And here as a guest is Gina Lollobrigida dancing with her on the floor. And we went back to the table. And finally, Gina deigns to talk to Parveen. And she said, and you, my dear, what are you doing? Following the star? And I was gobsmacked. And here was my host, star. And she'd attacked the woman that I loved. What was I to do? Before I could think of anything, Parveen came back with a razor-sharp answer. She said, no, my dear, I'm with my man, because I have a man. And Gina said, oh, she's clever, very clever, this one. And Parveen said, let's dance. Got up. And dance meant not, it was like a formal foxtrot, band playing, dark, nice dance floor. And on the dance floor, we started dancing. Parveen says, I'm leaving. I said, you're leaving the dance floor? She said, no, I'm leaving the restaurant. I said, you can't do that. We're guests of Gina. She said, I don't give a shit. I don't like her and I'm leaving. This puts you in a hell of a dilemma. What do? Do you walk out in Italy's biggest star, or do you stay with the woman that you love? And I tried to persuade her. She said, she may be important to your career, baby. She's not important to mine. And I was walking back to the table wondering, what am I going to do? Parveen leaves and I stay. Or I leave. So when Parveen picked up a bag, I said, fact is, Gina insulted the woman I love. So I bent down to Gina and said, Gina, I'm terribly sorry, but we have to leave. No, but why? Dinner is coming. I said, Gina, I'm terribly sorry, we have to leave. Thank you for hospitality. And I left with Parveen. And that was the end of my dinner with the great Gina Lollobrigida, one of the many stories in my book.
That is quite sad, I have to say. Is that a common thing, though? I mean, if you are a star in one part of the world and you're with someone who is a much huger star in another part of the world, is that a common thing? Is that natural in some form, especially when you've tasted fame of those levels?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, stars have egos. They've earned the right to an ego in a sense,
Right.
And they're objects of great adulation. They're used to having their way. They're not used to being crossed. They're not used to being sidelined. They're not used to being pushed around. And suddenly, if that starts happening, it becomes very unsettling. And then if you add to that dimension of a certain amount of mental instability, it magnifies. It causes unbelievable reactions. And I was very fearful of that. I thought, my God, if Parveen gets on the warpath, anything can happen.
Towards the later part of her life, I remember we used to read interviews of hers, where it did not seem like she was quite out there, but the press was still publishing her statements, very paranoid statements, all kinds of things that she said, that Parveen Babi said. Did you think that perhaps the press wasn't that sensitive, was not aware of exactly what she was going through before publishing those interviews?
Well, I think there was a certain amount of insensitivity on the part of the press. But what you're talking about is what happened much later in life when Parveen, after disappearing from India for all those years, came back to India and then accused Amitabh Bachchan of being a drug smuggler, of being a CIA agent, of being all kinds of things. The press just printed it because they got lovely headlines and they didn't allow for the fact that they knew that she had mental issues and she didn't portray it in that way. It's just like Parveen Babi says that Amitabh Bachchan is this, that, and the other. And it was sad because, she was ridiculed for it and she was hurting from it. And just after that, I met her at the Holiday Inn. It was a very poignant, sad final meeting that I had with her. But all the things she obviously said in a state when her paranoia and her delusional self had gone out of control. When I say out of control, she was still functional. She was still doing interior decoration for people. She was still functional. She was still able to swim. She was still able to order meals at restaurants. This was something that she lived with all her life. The inner side that needed protection, needed sanctuary, needed a womb, needed a protector, and the outer side, which is a mask that she knew how to wear to function socially.
In terms of the years that you've been in Bombay, 50 plus years, if I'm not mistaken, these are people you met when you first came in. Some of them you mentioned, Shekhar Kapoor, Mahesh Bhatt. Of course, Satyadev is not around, is no more. But when you meet them now, how do you look at how their lives sort of panned out over the years? Like, take me through Shekhar Kapoor, for instance. You guys, were you friends in college? Were you together
Yeah,
back in the...
we were together at St. Stephen's, and we were together in Mumbai. In fact, the first film Shekhar did was a film called Ishq 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 with Devanand, which I was also in. And Shekhar wanted to be an actor. And to while his time away, he started making ad films and then fell in love with making films and then became a director. He was the case of a man who wanted to become an actor but became a director. I was a case of a man who wanted to be a director but became an actor. But we've known each other all our lives. We've been in and out of each other's homes in Mumbai, in London, in Los Angeles. We've always stayed in touch, and we've always sort of had parallel lives internationally in different ways on different continents. And he's a very creative guy. He's a philosopher as much as he is a director. So we also share that spiritual, philosophical side of us, which is why we were able to be such good friends.
What about Mahesh Bhatt?
Mahesh was also very philosophical in his nature.
Well, he made his first film with you, Kabir, and then he had a full length career thereafter. How do you sort of see his life, how it panned out from making his first film with you in the lead?
Oh, Mahesh has had a remarkable career. I mean, he's made so many films, and he wanted to be a director. He became a director. He made many, many films. He's launched many stars. He's always made the films he wanted to make.
Right.
And he found the formula to make them. Don't make very big budget films. Make them within reasonable budgets. Let everyone make money, and make enough of them. Everyone makes lots of money. At the same time, he had lots of creative satisfactions. But he always had this very philosophical side to him, because while I was listening to Jiddu Krishnamurti, he fell in love with a guru called Yuji Krishnamurti, who was equally nihilistic in the sense of saying, denying all systems, and had a razor-sharp mind, a man of great intelligence and intellect, who I met, was impressed by. So Mahesh is also as much a philosopher. But you know what happens in film is that when you're working together, you all meet, etc., you all become part of one family. The minute that film is over, you then join other film groups and join other film families and know them. And then that film ends, you move on to the next film group. Generally, it's work that brings people together. So, and Mahesh is also not much of a socializer. He's not the kind of guy who just likes to meet for chit-chat. Kaam ki baat honi chahiye, you know. So, unless you particularly want to discuss a script or work with him.
But was he like that in the early years? Because he used to be quite a heavy drinker in the early years, which would mean a lot of socializing too, right?
He's a teetotaler now and has been for many, many years.
Right.
Those days, he would drink himself silly and pass out on the floor of beach house. There were all kinds of excesses we were both part of at the time.
Right. Okay. Last question, and this sort of sums up so many years of your life. We've of course only looked at one aspect of it predominantly, which is the Bombay film story. But as I said right at the beginning, there's so many careers you've had, so many choices you made, so many continents you worked at. When you look back right now, Kabir, what is the one thing that you can say for sure you regret? I know it's a tough one, but it's something that we have to think about as one thing that you regret. What would that be?
You know, we all have regrets.
Right.
when we look back, you think, I could have done that better, I could have done that better, I should have done that better. You look at it with the wisdom of today. And that's unfair because at that time you thought you were making the best decision you could.
Right.
Of course, we have all mistakes. Of course, we have all regrets. And not just one, but many.
Right.
But the important thing is not to dwell on those regrets. Remembrances, yes. Recalling remembrances of wonderful things that happened, even of tragic things that happened. Remembrances are important. Regrets, live with it, mourn it, move on. There's so much more to do in life. There are worlds to conquer. You cannot spend them thinking about which is my biggest regret. I don't do that. But I do believe, and I've always believed, that the best is yet to come.
Absolutely, Kabir Bedi, the best is yet to come. But thank you so much for remembering your stories. It is really, really a fascinating one that I'm so glad people are reading and that you wrote.
And Mayank, I'm so grateful to you for, firstly, reading my book, secondly, loving my book, and thirdly, telling so many people about my book. I cannot tell you how much that means to a debut writer to have produced this book and get that kind of appreciation, especially from a person like you. Thank you for that, Mayank.
Subscribe to Midday India. Get direct notifications on all our videos by clicking on the bell icon.